Oh, the Phantasmagorium show presents Guns, Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns. What happens when M is responsible for all of your woes? What do you do when you love the villain? How do you show Bond out of step without resorting to him being old in his third movie? But most importantly, you ever been shot in the head? It'll be fine. Did I mention the theme song? Garbage. Big shout out to Desmond Llewellyn as we are, of course, discussing 1999's The World Is Not Enough. My name is Scotty. My opposite number, Catherine, is here, and Steve is playing high card for a cool million. What's going on, Kat?
Just technical difficulties.
Is it because of John Cleese?
No, probably.
I would say it probably is. Well, to start off, come on, you're entitled to technical difficulties because did I show you the thing that I got, which is a thing that you already have? I got it in the mail. I got my License to Kill magazine digest. I got all the loveliness, and I know that this is not exciting for you because you have this. Oh, look at Carrie Lowell. Oh, I can't. Look at this. Look at that punum. Everyone's so happy. This is an amazing, and it's like thick cardstock. I know we've done this before, but I was just so happy to get it. Where did we get it from? MI6 Confidential?
Yes.
And this is amazing, just in terms of their storyboards, production. This is great. I would highly recommend these digests, no matter how questionable the website may be. Oh, I just wanted to show that off, just to add a little bit of continuity to the situation. But considering that we may be a little tight for time, how did you feel about The World Is Not Enough?
Good movie.
I was surprised as well. I didn't think it was going to be as good as I didn't like it in my remembrances. I feel like this is the emotional James Bond that Pierce Brosnan wanted to portray. When people talk about Timothy Dalton wanting to go back to the books and the Fleming and the feel of the Fleming, this seems more like Pierce Brosnan was born to play James Bond, and now that he had gone through the James Bond, he's like, hey, Babs, you know what? I have an idea. And it's a more emotionally resonant, a more remorseful, but also a more... There's so much about the interpretation of Pierce Brosnan in this film of James Bond that I really appreciated, and it is rather striking. How do you feel about Pierce Brosnan's portrayal of 007 in this film?
I think it's his best performance in the four. He's like a veteran, cool, calm, a bit loose, not as stiff as he was in GoldenEye, not as flourish as he was in Tomorrow Never Dies, and not as unbelievably bad as everything was in Die Another Day.
You know what? In the context of the Brosnan era, I suppose this is my favorite performance. But again, the reason I bring it up in the first place is because I think that he was portraying James Bond in the first one without really infusing anything, just bringing what he thought other people wanted to the role in GoldenEye. In Tomorrow Never Dies, I think that he was just enjoying being James Bond. And in this one, it feels like he brought something, and it feels like it's emotional to the level that makes it interesting for Pierce.
Yeah.
Because we're on a first name basis, me and Pierce. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so Let's see, other news this week. We found out that there's going to be a 4K box set of the Daniel Craig, all 5 Craig movies coming out on March 1st.
I suppose it's the easiest box set to make.
Yeah, still no announcement on whether there'll be a 60th anniversary 4K set for the whole thing.
I have a feeling that it's going to be more sort of, again, era based. Like they may, just for ease of transfers and the cost of the transfers, all of that. Hubba. Your knowledge of the transfers. I had heard that they had already 4K'd them ages ago because there were going to be re-releases, but then due to rights issues, they didn't necessarily follow through with that.
All the 4K cuts have been on Amazon Prime since 2015. And okay. I take it that those were just up converted from 2K. I don't think they spent the roughly $100,000 per movie to do a proper 4K scan, and then all the other thousands for restorations and all that. I don't think they did that. So I take it they could do if they do a box set, it probably won't be new transfers. It'll probably just be the Amazon Prime ones, but on disc they would look better anyway.
Right.
But no word yet. So there's that. And then Michael G. Wilson had his 80th birthday last week.
Oh, congratulations to Mike.
Yes.
Who was he in this movie? We usually skip over the Michael G. Wilson cameos.
He was one of Valentine's casino guards or whatever during the high stakes high card draw scene.
Oh, okay. I thought, and that's what we should do. We should do a show just based on our favorite Michael G. Wilson cameos. But you'll have to give me all of when they show up, and I'll find timestamps.
Yes.
Also, it's good to see LDG Geeks Enjoy. Thank you. Hey, buddy.
Hello.
Waves and hugs and martinis. What else? Oh, so my mom watched this movie last night. I did not watch it with her, but she didn't like it.
Oh, really?
The only reason I bring it up is because I mentioned when my dad didn't like No Time to Die, so I thought it was only equality to say that my mom didn't like this one, and she pinned a lot of it on Denise Richards.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I thought so too. How do you feel about Denise Richards in this film?
I had never heard of her before at the time I first saw this movie, so it didn't really bug me one way or another. It was just that I think that the way she first enters the movie dressed like Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, and the fact that her name is called multiple times Dr. Jones,
which is like weird.
They're wanting to plant that idea in your head because Lara Croft is typically referred to as like the female Indiana Jones, but that's not at all who this character is. So that was a little off-putting. But I didn't mind her performance overall. Not anywhere near as much as the tabloids and the critics did back when this came out in '99.
Well, and I don't want to get it into a sort of a thespian sort of competition, but Sophie Marceau is so much a better actress.
Yeah. And
I think that it's unfair to sort of, I don't think that you can say Denise Richards was terrible in this movie, because I agree with you. I don't think she was, but I do think that she was sort of put side by side with Sophie Marceau, who is a better actress. And when you see them side by side and which one ends up being the Bond girl in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shall I start the recap?
Yes, let's.
All right. So this movie begins with this movie, I should mention, also is kind of known for having one of the more confusing plots in a Bond movie, because they don't really, sometimes there's missing pieces of information. So
I think I got it.
Bond,
I think I got it.
He's at these bank offices in Spain. And throughout this sequence, they keep showing the museum across, like, down the street, even though they never actually go there, which is kind of funny. So he's getting frisked inside this office, and he's like, he's posing as a Swiss banker. And this guy's like, oh, yeah, it wasn't easy, but I retrieved the money. And Bond's there talking to him because he wants to know the circumstances, because somebody killed this MI6 agent, whom I presume was handing over the money as part of what the part of, we don't know at the time. The meeting isn't going very well, and there's this girl there giving out cigars, given a name in the novelization, Giulietta da Vinci, and she's giving out the cigars, and then she kind of casually leaves, and Bond, not liking the way things are going, has his pistol set on the table from where the guards put it when they confiscated it from him, and he's playing around with his glasses, talking about his hidden assets, and he clicks it, and it kind of, like, he folds the glasses, and then it blows up. It's like a grenade instead of a pistol. It's like, okay. He fights the guys, and he gets the main guy at gunpoint. He's like, well, you're going to have to, who's the assassin, or who's somebody. There's no context for anything happening in this scene, which is very confusing. And he's like, oh, I'll tell you what you want to know, but you have to protect me. And then he gets shot from across the street. Bond drops, gets cornered by another guard who points his gun at him, but that guard doesn't notice there's a sniper scope on him. He gets shot too. And with the guards from the building trying to break in, Bond decides it's time to go, so he ties himself like a makeshift bungee cord to jump off the balcony, rappels down to the street. Nobody on the ground seems to notice that this has happened. And off he goes. He just walks away all brisk. We then cut to MI6 headquarters in London, where we find out that the money belonged to this guy who's a personal friend of M's. And it seems like this is I don't know if you go so far to call it an abuse of power, or maybe it is that she's like, oh, my friend needs help, so I'm going to send Bond to do it, even though this isn't something that concerns Queen and Country. And I thought they should have pushed that angle a bit further in this movie. But Bond gives the guy the money. He thanks him. The guy leaves. Bond's like, who is he? He's like, oh, we studied law at Oxford together. And Bond's like, okay, whatever. Sitting around talking, and Bond's having a drink, and he notices there's a chemical reaction. And he's like, oh, shit, the money. And M radios to Moneypenny to stop King. The thing that's funny about this, though, is that King was no more than maybe, 15 seconds ahead of Bond. He should have caught him immediately, given how fast he's running. But he doesn't. So he zips through the building, and as King is going through like a metal detector or whatever on his way out, the scan sets off another chemical reaction with his lapel pin that registers with the money, and then it blows up, killing him, blowing a hole in the side of MI6. And out on the water, Bond sees the cigar girl in a big motorboat, and she's got a sniper, and it's not really clear why she's here, because if the bomb was supposed to blow the guy up, I guess this is just overkill. And so she's there and starts shooting, and Bond gets out of the way, and he decides to steal Q's fishing boat. A nice boat that they're souping up for MI6, and Q's like, stop, it isn't ready, and they just blast out the window. And what follows is a pretty cool boat chase. I like this one because it's decently length. It's not like the 13-minute thing that was in Live and Let Die. It's not the flimsy catamaran canoe thing from Man with the Golden Gun. Like, this is a nice boat chase between a big motorboat and this like combat efficient fishing boat, if you will. And yes. Bond's got all sorts of gadgets on it. He shoots bombs, bullets. He takes shortcuts. He dodges the cigar girl shooting at him.
He dives and straightens his tie.
He does. He dives and goes under the water and straightens his tie as and he comes back up above the surface eventually, takes a shortcut blasting through this restaurant using of course there's got a little bit of a rocket booster on the back of this thing, so he goes on land.
Of course. How does it drive on land though?
I think he just blasts up this makeshift ramp and it just slides across and then bounces back in the water. It turns through alleyways. Well, he turns through like a water alleyway and splashes a bunch of cops. They're like, what was that?
No, he's on a road for quite a while. Now, the thing is that I think that there are actually wheels on the bottom of the hull, but I could be mistaken. Okay, yeah, there's probably wheels or something. You never see him, though, and right. You don't hear him. So he ends up catching up with a cigar girl who parks the boat at the Millennium Dome. There's something going on with a hot air balloon, so she orders the guys out at gunpoint and says, come on, let's go. They cut the lines for her. They take off. And then Bond sails his motorboat, or his fishing boat, right towards the embankment, flies over the embankment, lets go, leaping out of the boat, grabs onto one of the tow ropes from the balloon. It takes off. And he's like, oh, I can protect you. Tell me what's going on. You're cornered. And she's like, oh, not from him.
Yeah, classic Bondian tropes. And she shoots the
Yeah.
oxygen tank, and for some reason they all blow up. And he lets go. She's dead. He hits the Millennium Dome and starts tumbling down below and messes up his shoulder on the way down. We then get a main title sequence that is very much about oil and the little rainbow colors that you get with oil.
Yeah.
And the oil derricks and all that kind of all shapes and sizes and that kind of stuff with the silhouetted girls or whatever.
And
The song's
performed by
by
Garbage. Yeah.
I like
How
the
did you
song. It's really good. One of my favorites.
really? Huh.
Well, I did edit it on my sound editing app to make it sound a little different, so it's really good.
I would love to hear that someday.
So there's that, and we come out of that to Robert King's funeral in Scotland, and Bond's there. You see Sophie Marceau playing Electra King. She's pretending, really sad at the funeral and all that. And Robinson is with Bond, Moneypenny, and he asks, "Who's that?" And he's like, "Oh, it's Electra, King's daughter." And in one shot, you actually see the DB5 in the background parked, like
Cool.
up by outside the church, and they're walking along, and it's like, I guess they're all here because M likes Robert, and they're there to offer support. I mean, it's a little weird. Okay. Yeah, it's just kind of odd. So from there, we go to the backup MI6 headquarters temporarily in Scotland.
Have you
on
ever
the
been
coast.
invited to a barbecue by your boss that you had to go to? Or if you didn't go, it was like it was going to be, they wouldn't like you in the office anymore? I feel like this was that kind of funeral.
Probably.
Yeah.
So he goes to, they go back to the MI6 backup headquarters on the coast.
Scotland.
Yes, and we have the return of Bill Tanner from GoldenEye, and
I was so happy to see him.
Yes, and he's talking about the science behind the bomb, saying it was dipped in chemicals and blah blah blah, created the reaction. And M is taking this really personally. She's like, "We're gonna chase whoever did this to the ends of the earth if necessary," and everybody's just kind of awkwardly silent because this is still essentially piggybacking off of something which should never have been an MI6 mission in the first place, and that's just aerating the room. And Bond is told that, yeah, you're not gonna. And Bond is upset because after the briefing, he turns to Tanner. He's like, "Sorry, it's M's orders. You're not going to be on this because of his injury." So he goes to see the doctor, Dr. Holly Warmflash. How original. Yeah, that's another. That's got to be the goofiest name in the Brosnan era.
Or any era. Yeah,
that's true. He basically seduces her to get a clean bill of health, and she's like, "Well, I'll do it as long as you call me back." And he's like, "Oh, okay." So he leaves, and he checks out his computer. And
Cat. I hate to say this about Dr. Warmflash. Not that hot. Like, she's thin and whatevs, but she doesn't seem like Bond's type. She seems more like the girl in the DB5, the other doctor, pardon me, in the DB5 at the beginning of GoldenEye. She is literally a representation of Bond using his charm to get what he wants without any regard for the emotions of others. She's not Bond level. Bond's a jerk. And I think it's something that is prevalent throughout this movie, is that Bond is an asshole.
So he gets on a computer and checks the internet, and it says, "Oh, Electra King is still a wild child of Robert King." And he loads of old video that says the Electra King kidnapping ordeal is over. And you see this recorded tape, probably from her kidnappers, that was sent in, and she's, she looks all disheveled, and she's like, blah 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 or whatever. And we see that the ransom was for $5 million, and Bond starts thinking about this, realizes that that's $5 million cash, but it translates to a different, very specific number in British pounds. And he's like, "That's too specific."
$33,330.33.
Yeah, something like that. And he figures that, okay, that's not a coincidence, because that's the same amount of money that was in King's briefcase, or King's case that he retrieved. So I'm guessing the implication is that, which is odd, because Bond goes back into the briefing room. He tells M that you're the only one who could have sealed her file. She's like, "Okay, everybody out." And she fesses up to the fact that she told King not to pay the ransom because she wanted to bait him to catch Renard. And the kid and Bond shows her that the money is the same amount as the ransom. He says it's a message. The old terrorist is back, and we find out his name was Victor Zokaz, nicknamed Renard. He's an anarchist. He was the one who kidnapped Elektra for the money, and M sent 009, I think it was, after him. He put a bullet in his head, but Renard survived, tracked down the assassin, MI6 agent, 009 or whatever, and killed him. And it's like, okay. And according to the doctor, he's going to get stronger and stronger every day until the day he dies, which is something they completely forgot about after that one line, that point in the movie, it seemed. They don't really push it.
I disagree. They push it so hard about him not being able to feel, about everything being shut off. It's
not about him being stronger and than any normal man and all that stuff. Like,
but I think that they're referencing the fact that because he doesn't feel, that's what makes him stronger. It's like they show him later and he does physical things, and it's like, you wouldn't be able to do this if you feel pain. Like, I think that he actually breaks things and it doesn't bother him. It's like when you break your ribs, is there anything you can do about it? As long as you don't have internal bleeding, he's good in a fight and he knows how to protect himself, but he doesn't feel the pain of everything that he's done. That's my interpretation.
Yeah. So here's the weird part. The implication was that the money this guy got back was the ransom money that they baited him with. But the fact that it's the same amount, Bond says it's a message, implying that this is a different set of money, that he's sending a message. So I don't know what's going on here. It's like, was that the ransom money? And if it wasn't the ransom money, then why? Who was it that had it that he had to retrieve the money from? It's like, I can't follow this story. Did you figure that out?
Well, okay, so the entire purpose is because apparently money was funding terrorism, right? That's why they were after the money in the first place. Bond gets the money because it was stolen from Mr. King. They follow the money. The money blows up Mr. King because it was very specific. We're returning the money. I don't know why MI6 wouldn't use a check, but cash is more dramatic. So, but also Bond does say that he doesn't want to take a cashier's check from a Swiss bank. He's actually rather prejudiced against the Swiss. So then as we go forward and with getting the money back, it's a message, and it's, well, like, we get into spoilers, it's not about Renard.
Right, but when he says it's a message, that implies that the money is separate. So how did they get the money from him in the first place if it wasn't the ransom money?
Well, because Renard...
Like, they just randomly stole it? I guess. See,
is it a MacGuffin? Is it a MacGuffin? Is it just sort of like the thing that plot rolls?
The beginning of the money, yes, but when he says it's a message, it implies it's a separate set of money, which means if that wasn't him retrieving the ransom money, then how did Renard then get that money? Because if he's sending a message, obviously for it to be his money, they would have had to acquire it, which made me think that it was the ransom money. But if it's not the ransom money, because it can't be, because otherwise that wouldn't be a message. That'd just be, of course, it's the same, right? So it's like I can't really follow how they got a hold of the separate set of money. It's just like they just had it randomly, I guess.
Well, he's a crime lord. He's a terrorist.
Yeah, see, they don't bother explaining it, and that's a plot hole. So he says that the money is the same.
You're too strict with your James Bond films.
Yeah, so they say it's the same, and M decides that, okay, I'm going to send you to go watch Elektra to make sure she's safe. Bond's like, okay, and he goes to see her in Azerbaijan. Before he leaves, he goes to see Q, and Q is in the midst of training his replacement because, incidentally, Desmond Llewellyn is going to retire from the role in this movie, and they cast a guy dumber than Q. Well, not the actor is, but the character of Q's replacement, R, as Bond playfully calls him, is a lot dumber than Q. He's very absent-minded, played by John Cleese. It's kind of funny, and he's kind of a goofball. He like closes the door on Bond's new car and gets his lab coat stuck, and he can't figure out why he can't walk forward. And he has him test out this jacket, and Q is kind of beside himself that he's literally explaining everything. Like, put your left arm in the left sleeve, and your right arm goes in the right sleeve. Now check the pockets, the zipper. And Q just kind of looks at Bond like he can't with this. And he's like, just pull the tag. So he pulls the tag. He's like, what the Q said, and then he just gets engulfed by what looks like a giant, like, styrofoam golf ball. It's keeping him safe as he's tumbling over. And Bond's like, you're not really retiring, are you, Q? And he's like, well, listen, 007, there's always tried to teach you two things. First, never let them see you bleed. And the second, always have an escape plan. And then he just hits the escape switch, and his chair just goes underneath the floor. And it's so eerie, given that Desmond was killed about a few weeks after this film came out.
Well, and not to digress about Desmond Llewellyn, but when you watch this film and you realize how old the man was in this film, when he did die, he died in a car collision.
Hey, he was 86.
Yeah,
on his way home from like a public appearance as Q, where he signed autographs and stuff.
Yeah, not natural causes.
Yeah. So that was really sad. And
but I think it was poignant, and I appreciated it. Like, he was signed up for the next one. He was supposed to be in the next one, but obviously, fate had other plans. But I think it was a good sort of, you're not retiring anytime soon, are you? And, you know, I liked that it was actually an anticipatory bookend.
Was he supposed to come back? You sure?
I think so. I have no facts to back this up.
Because it seems like the way they scripted it is if it's almost like him saying his goodbye. Like, especially when he ends up by saying, I always try to teach you two things.
Yeah, well, at the end of Skyfall, I thought M wouldn't be in any more of the movies.
Well, that's a little different. That's them being bad writing.
Yeah.
So Q disappears, and Bond goes to Azerbaijan, and you have this great establishing shot of just miles of just all these oil derricks. And somewhere in the middle of this, it's kind of funny. Bond's driving in his BMW Z3 down the middle of this barren tract of all of it, flat as can be, with all these oil derricks. And then in like the next shot, he's in like this pinewood forest, and you see these big helicopters with all the blades dangling from him, trimming the trees. That was an idea they had for GoldenEye that they didn't end up using.
Is that a real thing? It makes sense.
I've never heard of that, because the thing
I'd have to look it up. I don't think
it's real. It sounds like something they just made up for the movie, because there's a lot of reasons why you don't just haphazardly do that, because you'd have to be so precise with your helicopter getting so close to the trees, because it doesn't help to just random, because each tree branch has to be trimmed differently. It's not like it would be one solid, like several blades just randomly cutting, because it would be cutting. It's not like the blades swing around and move for each branch. It's just one straight buzz cut. So
no, but I was thinking about making it for like roads. Like if you had to just clear cut specifically, but maybe it's not a thing. I saw it in a James Bond movie. Why would it be a thing?
So he arrives at this like construction site, and there's these protesters that are being arrested, and Elektra's head of security, Sasha Davidoff, is there to greet him. He's like, yeah, we've had some problem with the locals because of the route of the pipeline. And he says, oh yeah, Elektra's up the hill. And you see all these people protesting on this nice green hillside, all these boulders. And at the top, there's like this church, or it's not a church, it's like a holy site. Because inside this cave, there's like these ancient cave paintings or whatever. And Elektra goes inside to consult with like the high priest or whatever. And then he comes out and says something, and I apologize, I don't know what language he's speaking. And then all the protesters start cheering and being so happy. And then the construction foreman is kind of upset with Elektra. She's like, well, just build the pipeline around the mountain. We're not destroying this. And he's like, but your father would have. He's like, I'm not your father, my father. And they're frustrated. And the foreman turns to Davidoff. He's like, Davidoff. He's like, I already talked to her. So she's earning the love of the people by not destroying their holy sites, which is good, because she's already considering where her plans are starting to go. So with her as well is this bodyguard who only says, I think, maybe one or two lines in the whole movie, maybe one.
What's his name? He reminds me of Mr. Kill.
The character's name is Gabor, played by John Saru. really tall guy with dreadlocks, and he's kind of walk around. So he's following her down the hill, and Bond introduces himself to
Apparently, he was
Elektra,
an
and he says,
Australian gladiator.
"Yeah, he has like a karate school or something down there, or he
Sure.
did." So Bond introduces himself to Elektra, saying, "M sent me to protect you. We think your life might be in danger." And she laughs and invites him into her little portable office, and she shows him what she's trying to do. That there's pipelines going from the Bosphorus, the 3 Russian pipelines, just go to the north end of the Black Sea and are shipped across. And hers, she says, she's going to bypass the Bosphorus and the Black Sea entirely by going south, passing around to East. And it's like, okay, so she wants her pipeline to go through there. And she's like, yeah, there's a lot of people who are upset with me for doing this, Russian separatists, whomever. And Bond's like, well, M still thinks your life might be in danger. She's like, okay, whatever. And she says, well, I gotta go because I gotta go check survey the pipeline routes. And Bond's like, oh, I've always wanted to check the survey lines. She gives him this look like, really? And so he decides to go with her, and they're skiing up in the mountains, and it's beautiful, and she's playing the role of the innocent. Like, oh, this is my gift to the world. And it's like she's so, kind of full of herself, and it's like, okay. And then Bond
But
notices,
she's not. Okay, wait. Hang on a second. I think you're reading into it through your hindsight being 2020. She is still presented as being a survivor and like the bereaved at this point, and then shown the Empire, or not the Empire, but like I'm assuming that Electra King had stuff to do with this pipeline and the business of King Oil. Right?
mm-hmm.
So she's doing the thing, and at this point, Bond is swooning over her capabilities and her strength and resilience. Right?
I perceived it as her just being a little prissy. It's like, even watching this on first, it's like, it seems a bit too, like when Bond was looking at the computer earlier, and it said, oh, she's still a wild child or whatever. And it's like, yeah, I can kind of see that. So they're looking at the survey lines, and all of a sudden there's these parahawks that show up. And Bond's like, this is, he's like, oh, they're here to get you. It's not a social call. And he says, head into the gully. I'll lead him into the trees. Go. And so he takes off on his skis, and sure enough, they all start chasing him. And some of them come down way too low into the branches, and Bond gets them caught up in the trees. Others he gets caught up, just crash into each other. One of them, he gets to go off a cliff, and he laughs. He's like, haha, see you back at the lodge. But then it sprouts a parachute and comes back. But it's neat that he's unarmed.
So good. That was best.
Yeah, Bond's unarmed, and yet he manages to destroy all of these things.
Yeah,
which is pretty cool.
Wit.
And he and Elektra, he gets back to her in the gully, and then the snow kind of caves in below them. And they fall in, and he pulls the pin on the jacket to encase them in the big, whatever that material is, golf ball. Mm-hmm. And she starts panicking.
Gore-Tex.
Having like a panic.
Gore-Tex.
Gore-Tex. And she's having like a panic attack, going, not me, blah, blah. And Bond is trying to get her to calm down, and then he cuts their way out of it. And from there, he goes to Zhukovsky's casino. And we see that in this movie, unlike in GoldenEye, Zhukovsky is no longer operating out of this sleazy dump. He's now very rich, striking it rich here in Kazakhstan. And he's got it like a
casino owner and caviar connoisseur, raconteur.
Yes. And Bond walks through the casino, and he's got these X-ray glasses on, and he's seeing everybody's, all their wallets and their guns and their knives, and everybody,
and
even all the hot chicks at the table, all seem armed to the teeth. Yep. And he goes up to the bartender, and he says he wants to talk to Valentine, and Bond is strangely very angry and impatient, and he's upsetting like the guy at the bar, or the bartender. He's like, no, you're gonna do, you're gonna wait here, blah blah blah. He's like, get out of here. And Bond's like, no. He's like, I don't think you heard me. And Bond just slams the guy down on the table and pulls his knife out and disarms the guy of his knife and pins him to the bar. And then he hands over the rest of the guy's guns to the bartender, who's like, okay, thank you. And then he walks over to Mr. Bullion, who's a little weird and seemingly out of place in this film. He's a guy he played by a rapper named Goldie. That's his rapper's name. And he's got like gold bullion teeth. He's got gold chains, gold rings, all this. And Bond's like, after you, I insist. Puts his gun under there. It's like, okay. So
I thought he was a DJ.
yeah, that's it. He might be a DJ. I think, yeah, you're right. I think he's a DJ. So Bond puts a gun to him and marches him into the back room where Tarkovsky is being like accosted by these two beautiful girls, and he sees that James is here. And unlike before, he was very upset. He's like, Bond, James Bond. And he's like, oh, come on, we'll have caviar and great. And he's like, Bond's not having it. And he just pulls up the gun and he's like, lose the girls, Valentine. We need to talk. And he's like, oh, guy, business. So he's like, see you later. So they go over to Bullion and he pulls out these big stacks of cash from his jacket and gives it to them. And Valentine's like, make sure they lose it in this casino.
Robbie Coltrane's amazing in this.
He is. And I don't mind that they didn't really dive into his change in fortune. Is this just because of all the money that Bond gave him in GoldenEye, or all the gold or whatever that he set him up with? Maybe they made a wise investment, I guess.
Well, no, maybe. But even in GoldenEye, he talks about the changes in economies and everything. And so I think that this was his retirement plan. Being a player, having some caviar. Let's have a casino.
Yeah. So Bond then takes a piece of the tarp that he stole from one of the Tomahawks and he lets it there. And he's like, and Valentine tells him it's like the anti-Russian terrorist league, that they're, they disband terrorist groups and things like that. And Bond mentions that Renard is behind it. And he's like, yeah, that guy's, and he's like, oh, you and I need to have a drink. So he goes over to his mini bar and he's like, yeah, Renard was a KGB agent, but after Afghanistan, they thought he's too crazy. They cut him loose. Then he starts, going around the world, as Bond mentions earlier, all the romantic vacation spots like Cambodia and Siam and,
Corto Maltese,
Afghanistan, Pakistan, Corto Maltese, all these places. And Valentine can't figure why Renard would be interested in this. Bond can't figure it out yet either. And he tells him he's there to protect Elektra. And Bond's like, oh, Valentine's like, it seems Elektra doesn't share your concerns for her safety. And you see her on this really old school TV monitor walking into the casino. Mm-hmm. So Bond goes to greet her there. And it's funny, you notice when Bond goes to greet Elektra and they're walking down the whole aisle in the casino, you see this guy that the guards are like manhandling and forcing out the casino and up the stairs. And it's
I did notice that, man.
Yeah, I'm like, hey, that's a little nice touch. And she's like, Bond's like, what are you doing here? It's not safe. She's like, oh, I'm not going to be afraid and hide that kind of stuff. So they march in, and Tarkovsky comes out to greet her. He's like, oh, yes, so we saved your father's seat at the table. You always loved coming into my casino type thing. And he takes him into this back room, a private poker table there. A blue surface this time instead of the traditional green, which looked kind of neat. And he's like, oh, so what shall it be? And he rattles off all these games they could play. And she's like, how about high card draw? High stakes. And Bond kind of looks at her. He's like, no. And she's like, $1 million. And she looks right at Bond when she says that to like antagonize him. And he's like, no, you don't have. And Bond's like, you don't have to do this. She's like, yes, I am. So she cuts the check. And then Valentine has his, the dealer or whatever, get out with the card to start pulling the high card. Bond's like, wait, bury the top 3 cards. Valentine's like, okay. So then they pull the cards, and I can't remember what hers was. Hers was like a queen, I think.
It was the Queen of Hearts.
Yeah, Queen. Elektra pulls the Queen of Hearts, and then Valentine's like, I'm afraid you have been beaten. Ace of Clubs. No hard feelings. And then she walks back out into the casino, and Bond's like, I don't think you're ready to play this game. And she's like, I'm doing it anyway. So she walks out, and not the game is in the literal game, but you could tell that she's trying to be a bit flirtatious and throwing caution to the wind type thing. And Bond asks her, well, where's Davidoff? She's like, oh, I gave him the night off. And they start walking back through the casino. And we cut to this place that's called the Devil's Breath. According to Renard, who is here, this is fire that burns for all eternity. I don't know if this is I think this is based on something, inspired by something real. I don't know if this particular thing is real. So Renard is there, and he looks, and you have the music cue. And that's right, I forgot. I should have mentioned that while she was at the table playing the high card draw, she mentioned the line, when Bond says you don't have to do this, she's like, well, there's no point in living if you can't feel alive. And they play this very specific piano key tune, which is important to remember. So anyway, Renard is here greeting Davidoff and this guy, Dr. Arkov. And Arkov is like, the mission didn't go well today. The Parahawks were meant to be returned. People are going to ask questions of me all because of his incompetence. And Bond was, and because Davidoff's trying to explain, and Renard's like, Bond was unarmed, which of course makes it look really bad. But having listened to what Arkov had to say about how, hey, we were supposed to return this shit. This was supposed to be a quick done thing. Now there's going to be all these questions.
It really doesn't make
Renard's
sense.
Like, you're right. And he's like, "You're right. Davidoff should be punished." He's like, "Davidoff, hold this for me." And he picks up one of the flaming coals and forces it in Davidoff's hand. And Davidoff is like, falls to his knees, and he's like, "Well, you failed your test of devotion. You kill him." And instead, they kill Dr. Arkov to Davidoff's surprise. To which Renard's like, he failed his test of devotion, which I'm not exactly sure what he means by that, because he did what he was supposed to do. He provided the Parahawks, and the Parahawks are the one who failed to kill Bond. And
But
that's what
he
Davidoff
did say,
requested.
but he did say specifically, it's like we have to scrub the rest of the mission. Like there's too much. Like it's not.
I guess that's it. Yeah, that's right. He did say that. So okay, that's probably it. So he's like, you better be at the plane, and do be on time. And it's like, oh, okay. So we cut back to Bond and Elektra are now sleeping together, and it's like, oh, of course, Bond couldn't stick to his parameters. And
Oh, what? Wait, how many of these movies have we watched, Kat?
Well, M specifically told him that this was not something to be frisky about.
Said?
Yes. So
Bond
is there with. Yes. So Bond is there. They have sex, and he decides to sneak out after she's gone to bed, and he sneaks up into Davidoff's outdoor office, and he's looking around in there in his flashlight and snooping around to see what's going on, and he sees Davidoff drive up. And Davidoff goes into his office and he looks around and he kind of notices that something's off, but he can't put his finger on what it is. And then we see Davidoff take a picture of himself with like a Polaroid that automatically prints his picture. And Bond is kind of looking, and he opens the back of Davidoff's car to see that Dr. Arkov is dead in the back. Then a guard comes along with a guard dog, and Bond is missing. It's like, oh, where'd he go? And Davidoff walks off. He gets in the car and starts driving, and he drives off to this local airstrip. And then he opens the back of the trunk of the car and pulls the tarp off that was covering Arkov, and Bond is there lying instead. And he kills him just outright, which I thought was interesting, because I'm like, why not interrogate and say, hey, I guess that's because Bond still assumes this is a simple revenge mission for Renard, so he doesn't think there's anything else to find out about, so he just shoots this guy dead, even though it seems to me like Davidoff is the guy who probably would have cracked real easy if Bond had pushed him for it. So he shoots him. Yeah, he shoots him dead. And he takes his ID.
But as far as Bond knows at this point, Davidoff killed the guy in Davidoff's trunk. So
yes. Well, no, I'm not saying that he should have shown mercy. I'm saying I'm surprised that he didn't try and get some answers out of him first before he just outright plugged him. And I forgot to mention, Bond did debut a new gadget. He had a credit card, which you slide the top of it, and it has like a universal key, which is pretty cool.
I really like that. That was cool.
Yeah. So Bond gets the duffel bag that was in the back of Davidoff's car. He walks out to this plane that's on the runway, and he's greeted by these guys. These Russian guys in tracksuits are all bald, and they're like, "Oh, you're late." And this guy's like, "Where's Davidoff? I was told to expect him." And Bond's like, "Oh, he got buried with work." And he's clearly sounding guilty when he's saying this. Even the look on his face suggests that he's having trouble coming up with this excuse. And the guy actually gives him a second look over it. He's like, yeah, okay, whatever. So they get in the plane. They're like, we got to go. And then this other guy comes out from the front, like the pilot, or he's like, hey, did you bring the stuff? And Bond like shakes the duffel bag, like as if to test it to make sure there's something in it, and that he didn't leave something behind in the car. And he's like, oh yes, and he hands it to him. And the guy opens it and he pulls out these really nice sneakers, like these are shorts or whatever. And he's like, good, very good. And I'm like, what, are they being bought just for a pair of like these nice shoes? What are they like?
And it's weird because the next shot is on the plane when they're taking off, and everyone is wearing these shoes. Like, it's, if you want to be part of the cool kids, you got to be wearing these sneakers. It was...
Yeah, it's like he brought the extra shoes for everybody, I guess, in the bag.
You know what I'm calling product placement?
Oh, it's definitely a product placement move, but I guess the pilot, even though these are terrorists working for Renard, I guess they can be bought by, bought with Western goods. I guess that's the idea, because they're in Kazakhstan. Hey, you brought me some Air Jordans or whatever.
Of course.
So whatever. So and I'm guessing that the stuff that he's asking him to bring wasn't urgent. It was just something that he said he was going to bring for them, like to sweeten the deal, I guess. So they take off
from
the plane.
The West.
Yes. So they take off and they fly to Kazakhstan. And when they're on approach, the guy who Bond talked to earlier tosses Bond a tracksuit outfit as well, with like the red star on it and all that. And he says, get ready. And so Bond goes into the bathroom, he gets changed, and he takes out his Universal Exports card and he gets his razor and cuts the picture out and places it onto Arkov's ID. then they land, and they're at basically a facility, a nuclear storage facility, and they're in the process of disarmament. Because around this time, in real life even, Kazakhstan had revealed inadvertently that they had a bunch of nukes, and they agreed to give them up for nothing. And NATO and all these other countries good job, because apparently they wanted nukes of their own for nuclear deterrence, and I can't remember the circumstances how they basically fessed up that they would go into NATO with the exception if they gave up their nukes, and that was the deal. And so NATO's like, very nice, and so, which I thought was kind of funny. And so that I guess that's what this is alluding to by the fact that we see this whole team there disarming taking apart the nukes and removing the plutonium and all the trigger mounts things. And we see inside, in these very Dr. No-esque outfits, Doctor.
That's not fair. That's not fair.
That's true. It doesn't actually look the same. We're introduced to Dr. Christmas Jones as she's removing one of the plutonium heads. And she's like, I'm going to go up for some air. This one's ready so you can blow it. So she goes outside, and she takes the suit off, and she tells another one of her colleagues that, okay, I removed this so you can blow those trigger heads down. And he's like, okay. And then Bond is there as Dr. Arkoff, and the military colonel here is talking to him. He's like, don't bother with her. Take my word for it. They tried these multiple times. They can't get any glimmer out of her. And she takes off her hazmat suit, and she's got the whole Lara Croft thing going on with the cropped shorts and the army green type crop top, and her hair is even the same color and the same hairstyle, and her name Jones for Dr. Jones. So she walks up to him to introduce herself, and he's like, it's Dr. Jones, Christmas Jones. Don't make any jokes. I heard them all. And he's like, I don't know any doctor jokes. And she's laughing, and he's like,
no, she's not laughing. Okay. She is not having a good time with James Bond.
Well, he's kind of like, she's not really having a good time with us. And he's like, well, is it pretty good? And she's like, okay. She checks his paperwork, and she's like, oh, you can go down there. And he's like, wait, well, don't I need one of those that has my? She's like, no, everything's already been disarmed. So, you're going to be safe. But the only thing you should have to, I've been spending the last, whatever, how many years it is or whatever, trying to take apart all of you're cleaning up your nuclear mess, basically. So the only person you have to be afraid of is me. And he kind of smiles and walks off, and she's like, oh, doctor, are you forgetting something? And he looks, and the radiator card, which is neat. And this actually is like a card that you wear that kind of measures how much radiation you're getting while you're down there, so you know when it's been too long and when it's time to get out. So he's like, oh, thank you. So he gets the card. He goes inside.
I never knew what those did.
Yeah, it's kind of like a modern replacement of the whole canary in the coal mine thing.
Right, cool. No, I seriously, whenever anybody says in a movie a radiation tag, I'm like, I have no idea what that does. So thank you.
So
it
she
measures the radiation and it says get out. All right.
So as he's walking into the facility, she kind of gives him another once over. Like, she's not really so sure about him, and takes another look at his paperwork. The other separate terrorists, meanwhile, have already made their way inside. I don't know why they left Bond behind, but they did. So Bond goes down the utility elevator by himself into the subterranean complex where they store all of his shit. And you see the terrorists are there, and they're taking it apart, looking like they're members of the team. And Renard is there, and he's shouting orders, and he turns around, and Bond pulls a gun on him, pulls him aside, and he's like threatening him and all of that. And he's like, oh, you can't kill me because I'm already dead. He just keeps hitting on that note. And Renard picks up on the fact that Bond clearly doesn't know what's really going on.
Right.
And he's like, go ahead, shoot me. I welcome it. My men will hear the shot and kill you. And Bond's like, and then the firefight will bring down half the army from above. He's like, oh, but if a certain phone call isn't made in 20 minutes, Electra dies. And Bond gets angry, really pissed off, and you could tell. But he's like, you're bluffing. And he's like, oh, isn't it wonderful to be threatened by a man who doesn't know what he's involved in? And Bond's like, oh, and a certain man who believes in nothing like you understands the revenge, And he's like, oh, how was it? How was she? How did it feel to taste? I knew her when she was innocent. How does it feel to know that I broke her in for you? Which is really gross. And Bond responds in kind by smacking him in the forehead with the butt of the gun, drawing blood. And even though Renard supposedly can't feel pain, he reacts almost like it did him a wallop for a second. Because he falls on the ground, and he's like grabbing his head, and he's like shaking. And he's like, oh, this is going to be dead. And he's like, well, there's no point in living if you can't feel alive. And then they play that music cue again. But then all of a sudden, the general or the colonel comes down with Dr. Jones. She's like, he's an imposter. Dr. Arkoff is 63 years old. And he tells him to put down the gun, and Bond's like, those are the imposters. They got their guys out on the plane. They're stealing the bomb, and they're not really listening. And so, being outnumbered, Bond puts his gun down. Renard stands up, and he sort of takes advantage of Bond's injuries. The guards are surrounding him, and he grabs onto Bond's shoulder, really squeezing that spot where it's broken, causing him a lot of pain. And Dr. Jones is looking at him sideways now, wondering what's going on here. And they're gonna leave anyway. And the Colonel's like, "That's it. You're not going. There are too many new faces around here, including yours, Renard. You're not. No, the bomb doesn't move until I am satisfied." And then Renard's like, "Okay, I've had enough of this." So whips out this machine gun, and then he just starts mowing down, kills the Colonel and his goons. And Bond grabs Dr. Jones and jumps her down into this lower pit to hide as the gunshots are going off everywhere. They're firing, and she's like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "I work for the British government." And he uses Q's watch to shoot like a rappel wire up into one of the high beams that pulls them up. Starts shooting at these guys. Renard and his goons are pushing. The bomb's been loaded on the contraption, and there's like chains hanging from the ceiling on a pulley wire. So it's like sliding down across through the next room. And Renard's trying to close the doors to seal them in. And Dr. Jones picks up on this, and she gets up and starts trying to hotwire the circuit board with the power, one of the small portable generators, while Bond uses this great giant steel cart to pry the doors, prevent the doors from completely slamming shut. And it works to keep the side doors open, but then the doors going down and up are lifting this cart up. So Bond has to dive through just in time as the cart gets smashed in half. And Renard's shooting, and Bond fires a gun and hits Renard's guy in the leg or something. And he's slowing down and unable to move the bomb as much. And Renard's shouting at him, and the guy's like, eh. And then in frustration, Renard just kills the guy and decides to tosses his gun aside, moves the bomb along with him as Bond's trying to rush after him. And just as Jones is getting the doors open, Bond catches up with Renard, who's gotten in the elevator with the bomb, and he fires at the glass, but it's like bulletproof. And Renard's like, no hard feelings, Mr. Bond. We're even. Soon you feel nothing at all. And the elevator goes up, and Renard's got his arms crossed with his finger pointing down. And just as the elevator pulls up, it pulls the cord on this bomb, which is only saved for 5 seconds, but Bond waits entirely too long to start running from this. And he runs and he grabs onto these chains dangling from the ceiling and slides through the hallway. And he shouts at Dr. Jones, "Close it, close it!" And she runs to close the doors as the bomb goes off and hits all of these fuel canisters, causing even a bigger explosion. And because there's nowhere for the flames and the smoke to ventilate, it starts shooting down the hall. So she closes the doors at the absolute last second, but not fast enough, as some of the flames and sparks get in there and start catching fire in this room. So he's like, "Come on, we gotta go." So he goes up through the upper hatch exit where he uses there's like a platform to elevate out of, but instead of taking it all the way up, he shoots a hydraulic vent so that it blasts out all the way up a lot faster. And she's like, "So you're a British spy, do you have a name?" And it blasts up, and he's like, "The name's Bond. James Bond." The big music cues are shooting up the silo. And they leap out of the top exit back onto the ground. And meanwhile, we see Renard and his guys barreling out of the main entrance of this facility, with blasting their guns everywhere and escaping with the bomb. And then shortly afterwards, their plane flies away as Bond and Christmas Jones just get out of this pit in the silo in the nick of time as the explosion finally ventilates into the air. And she's like, "Don't worry, they won't get very far. Every bomb has a locator card." And Bond's like one of these. And he pulls it up, and you actually do see Renard take the locator card from the Colonel. It's like a quick blink and you miss it type thing. And that action sequence gets a lot of hate, I noticed, from a lot of critics and fans. They're not fans of it. I liked it a lot.
What? No, I like that. I thought it was cool. And
I've heard so many people complain about it.
See, the thing is that, okay, when Denise Richards, when Dr. Jones is on screen, she's in a different movie. She is pretty much action sidekick.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that she does a great job as action sidekick. And I think that they dressed her appropriately for 1999 to be action sidekick. I would like to remind you once again, this is the Pierce Brosnan era. A lot of people still associate this with the video game.
Yeah, again, I associate her and the way she's dressed a lot more with, Lara Croft, but
of course, but that's video game for your average individual. Anyway, moving on. Sorry.
Yeah, so the plane takes off with a locator card, and they're like, "Oh shit!" They don't really know what they're gonna do about this. So they go back to Bond first decides to go back to see Elektra at her house, and he sneaks in through like the back door, knocks Gabor unconscious, And she's like, "What are you doing? This is crazy." And Bond basically accuses her straight up of having Stockholm syndrome, and that you fell for Renard, and that's what this is about. And you killed your father, and and you did all this. And she's really disgusted by the accusation and slaps him.
Yeah, but I think that as the audience, like we are I think that when he says there's no point in living if you can't feel alive, I think that's the moment where everyone else, like, I think as the audience, it was like, oh, so she's the villain.
Right. And she tries to brush it off because Bond's like, "Oh, you knew he's isn't that your motto?" And he knew my shoulder right where it hurt me exactly. And she's like, "Well, you wore a sling at your arm at the funeral." And little words said whatever. And she tries to brush it off. It's nothing. And she's like, "Oh, I need you out of my sight," type of thing.
Yeah.
So then
Well,
we
but
cut
he
to
still has a job to do, so he goes with her to wherever they go.
yes, they go to a facility that monitors her pipeline, where M goes as well, because M is initially back in Scotland talking with Tanner and Robinson. They're updating what's going on, and their call gets interrupted by Elektra, who's like, "Bond's disappeared in the night. I really want you to come here." And Tanner tells M that it's not a good idea, and he's right. And she's like, "Get me out there." And he's like, "Ma'am," and she's like, "Just get me out there." Really dumb decision. So M goes to meet Bond and Elektra at this facility where they're able to monitor her pipeline, and there's an emergency situation because
Oh my
they believe
God.
Renard and his what?
Wait, can I stop you for just for 1 second?
Yeah.
Elektra King is M's first Silva.
Not really. I mean, she wasn't an agent.
But you understand where I'm coming from.
She didn't really betray Elektra.
She did. She used Elektra as bait.
But she didn't really know Elektra. She just
No, she was just best friends with
advised her
Elektra's
father.
father and decided that she was, the best course of action is that I'm going to use your daughter as bait. And so the same way that M eventually tossed away Silva, or his real name.
Sort of. So
all right. Anyway,
yeah,
it's just an idea.
All right, so they found out at this facility that Renard and his goons have sent part of the bomb that they've stolen inside this pipeline through the pig inspection line, which is like a device which goes through pipeline that can actually scrub all of the residue and other gunk out of there and test for leaks.
We saw them in Diamonds Are Forever.
Yes. And so they're monitoring that the bomb's on there, trying to figure out what they're going to do about it. And Bond takes M into the side room, and M scolds him, saying, "You violated a direct order. I told you to watch Elektra. I expressly forbade you to leave that. You left that girl alone, disobeying orders." Bond says, maybe the inside man. You shouldn't be so trusting of her. Goes, what if the inside man was an inside woman? She's like, kill her own father and attack her own pipeline. Why do all of that? To what end? And he's like, I don't know yet. And they go back outside, and even Elektra, looking guilty as ever, when no sooner they realize that her pipeline is being targeted, she turns to Bond. She's like, "Do you believe me now?" And it's like, okay, yeah, you're too guilty. And so Bond decides that he's got to go out there and do something about it. Dr. Jones says, "Well, do you know how to defuse one of those?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "You know what you need?" And he's like, "What? Me." And so they're like, okay. So they go to the...
That is a mischaracterization, because as they're walking out, he says, "What do I need to defuse a nuclear bomb?" And she says, "Me." It's not that she imposes herself. I think that Denise Richards Christmas Jones gets a bad rap in this movie, and I'm sorry. I'm going to defend her till my last.
Well, I didn't say it was a complaint. I just said that's what she says, which is true. That is what she says. What are you going to need? Me. So
yeah.
They go to they go out to the spot in the pipeline. He and Bond get on one of those pig inspection lines as well, and they start zooming through the tunnel. And now back at the headquarters, M and Elektra, and they can all see this on the screen, monitoring the progress. And in the tunnel, we're seeing that the bomb is catching up with them. And Bond keeps telling her to go faster, move it faster, because they don't want it to like smash into them. And they eventually get to roughly the same speeds as it catches up. Bond hooks the two of them together, and he asks her to defuse the bomb, and she successfully removes the half-weapon grade plutonium that was inside the trigger head, and she's about to defuse it, and Bond gets this idea, and he's like, "No, let it blow." And she's like, "But I can stop it." He's like, "Let it blow." And then they jump off the back of the cart, which would have probably killed him at those speeds.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, but it's
For
a James
sure.
Bond movie, so they just do cartwheels and they're fine.
Yeah,
And
they're fine.
then he leaps over to cover her. The bomb goes off, but it's not, of course, a nuclear explosion. It wipes out. According to Gabor, back at the facility, he says the bomb was a dud. It only took out about 50 yards of the pipeline. She's like, "Where's Bond?" And he's like,
It was
"Nothing," which is the only time he talks in the whole movie.
okay.
Yeah.
It was
No,
a
I didn't
really
say it was
cool
criticism.
explosion, though. It was like when it
Yeah,
goes
it was
off,
great. They built a
it
miniature
blows
for it,
up
and it just
and then contracts again. It was really destructive and it looked great.
yeah, it was pretty awesome. And then they, Bond and Dr. Jones are trying to climb out, and back at the headquarters, no sooner than this bomb has
Oh
gone
my
off and M realizes that Bond might be dead, Electra's like,
right.
"I want you to have this gift. My father would have wanted you to have it." And M's like, "Perhaps this isn't the best time," And she's like, "No, I insist." And so M opens it, and it's a lapel pin that set off the bomb. And M's all worried, and she's like, "It is such a lovely thing when he gave this to me. I just couldn't let it explode with the rest of him." And then Gabor and another henchman mow down everybody else in the room, and M's like, not having it, and so she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, Bond was, yeah, he's the best agent you ever have, or should I say had." And M just bitch slaps Elektra pretty hard, because it's funny, M, she would not say it to Bond's face, but she did tell Elektra that Bond's one of the best I have, but I'd never tell him this. And
Yep.
so when she's like, "That's the best agent you had," I loved it when she just slaps the bitch. I'm like, yes, it's like, this is what we need from M. But then they take her away, and Bond and Jones are climbing out of the crater hole that's been created by this explosion, and Bond tells her his suspicions. She's like, "Well, why blow up their own pipeline?" He's like, "Well, to make them look innocent, and I wanted you to let it blow up so that they think we're dead." And she's like, "Well, why leave this half of the plutonium? What can they do with just half the bomb?" And he's like, and really, it's not what they're going to do with this half. It's like what they're going to do, because that half was supposed to explode with the bomb if she hadn't removed it. It's what they're going to do with the other half. And
Right.
he's like, "Well, you're the scientist. You tell me what they're going to do with it." And she doesn't really know. So he calls into Robinson, who tells him that, M's missing, and it's a red alert, and we'll get back to you, over and out. He's like, "Okay." And he gets this idea, and he's like, I have this hint of this craving for beluga. And she's like, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah, caviar." So then we go back to the Caspian Sea, where Valentine is touring one of his facilities at the caviar factory, and it looks really run down or whatever. And he walks inside his private office in there, and he sees Dr. Jones sitting on this couch wearing this beautiful, like, this really hot pink colored dress.
Yeah,
With
where'd
this
she
blue
get
denim.
that?
Yeah, and she's wearing this dark blue denim jacket with it. And he's like, "How did you get in? I should call security and congratulate them." And he steps in, and then Bond slams the door behind him, having the guard, like, having his mouth covered. And Valentine's like, "Can't you just say hello like a normal person?" And Dr. Jones stands up and buttons up the shirt, and Bond just tells the guard to get lost. And he's like, "Oh," and then he puts the gun in Valentine's face. He's like, "Elektra drops $1 million on you casino. You don't bat an eyelash." It's like, "What?" It's like, "Renard and Elektra King are working together. They kidnapped him, and they're in league." And she's like, "I didn't know." And she's like, "Well, what do you know?" And this whole conversation is being overshadowed by the sound of helicopters. And in what is by far the most illogical scene in the film, Elektra has
Yeah.
dispatched her helicopters with saw blades to destroy the factory and kill him. I don't know how that's going to look like an accident, especially since you have your corporate logo blazoned all over the helicopters. Especially
But it's
since
a
the
very
insider is here.
come on,
Her
it's very
inside,
exciting. It's a very exciting scene.
it is. It's a exciting action sequence as Bond has to take it out. I love the part where the helicopter bisects and destroys Bond's car, and Valentine just gets a big smile on his face from it.
But
That was really funny.
Well, it starts off with Valentine being so upset about his property being destroyed, but when it bisects the BMW, that's crazy cool. But also, and Bond also gets to use the phone remote, which is not as cool as Tomorrow Never Dies, but it still goes and does stuff. And he has like a speak and spell steering wheel where he can manipulate missiles and stuff. The Stinger missiles, we finally see them. It's awesome.
Yeah, we see, the Stinger missiles, and so that's all really cool. And Bond destroys all the helicopters, and at the end of this action sequence, Valentine, having tried to dodge several of the blades which came flying his way, jumps into a pool of caviar unintentionally, and he's like drowning in it, and he's trying to get out, and Bond's like, okay, what's this all about? And he's like, well, I can't tell you. And he's like, and he won't help him out unless he tells him. And he's like, okay, my nephew Nikolai, he's in the Navy. He smuggles equipment for Elektra every once in a while. And Bond's like, and the payoff in the casino? I can't. He's smuggling something. He's providing him something else extra special, but I can't tell you where. And Bond is going to let him drown. He's like, where? And he's like, no, absolutely not. Where? And he's like, he finally fesses up. He's like, Istanbul. So they pull him out, and they're like, oh, if only we had
Constantinople.
No, Istanbul. So they're trying to, Bond's like, if only we had some champagne. And Dr. Jones is like, oh, it's our cream. And that was kind of funny. And then all of a sudden, Mr. Bullion shows up. And he's like, oh, where have you been? And he's like, oh, sorry, boss. I must have bumped my head. And he's like, yeah, well, I'll show you. Get over here. I'll show you what the bump of the head feels like. And then they have this great camera shot where Valentine and Bullion are looking up at Bond and Jones. And they look so defeated. And look a bit pathetic here in this scene, which is kind of funny. And Valentine, of course, he has to say it. He has to jinx it. He's like, well, we have no roof, but at least we have 4 good walls, eh? And then you hear the cracks and the booms start creaking, and we cut to this wide shot as Dr. Jones is running down the deck out of shot, and then all the walls fall over, and you hear Valentine's like, the insurance company is never going to believe this. We then cut to Maiden's Tower, which is an actual floating lighthouse in the Caspian Sea, or in the south of Istanbul. It's just south of the Black Sea, in Istanbul proper, along the river there. And this yacht shows up, and Elektra looks out the window and sees that it's Renard, and she runs up to greet him, and she's so much like the little spoiled rich, almost like a little girl in her personality, so uppity, and which really plays into what she's all about. And Renard presents her with this present, and he opens it, and it's the other half of the plutonium, and he's like, touch your future. And she starts very happy, and she's like, oh, I got a surprise for you too. And he takes her upstairs. She takes him upstairs to show M locked in a cell. And he's like, my executioner. Mm-hmm. And they have a little bit of a back and forth. Then Elektra leaves. And then
it's cool.
It is. And M's like, I hope you're proud of what you did to her. He's like, when he just tries to.
No. Okay, so this is where it sort of gets, because now we're winding into the manipulation of Elektra King. Is that when Renard is introduced to M is like, I have absolutely no idea how to describe what awful you have done to that woman, that girl, as M describes her. And in response, Renard says, oh my God, I didn't do this to her. You did. How would you even remotely think of letting her be in my power? Like, this is your fault. You should have taken her away from me. She is worth 50 of me.
And she's like, for once, I agree with you.
Yeah, of course. And it's incredible, because it's a weird thing, because for the villain of the movie, and we're still in the position where this, like, Renard is the villain, and he says, it's like, she's so much better than me. And then we as an audience find out, spoilers, later.
So he leaves, and he's like, shows her the clock, and he's like, at 12 o'clock tomorrow, you're gonna die.
Yeah.
And so
we got a plan. We're gonna blow up. This city is toast.
So he leaves, and M immediately gets like a stick or whatever, and she's trying to reach the clock because it's sitting on a stool, and she's reaching for it and accidentally knocks it over, and is kind of frustrated by that. And then at night we see Elektra and Renard are in bed together, and he's like feeling her up, and she's like, oh, and he says, so warm and beautiful, and she's like, what do you know? You can't feel shit, which is like such a callous and dismissive way to say it. And
because she's manipulating him.
Yeah, I know. And he gets up and he goes towards the window, and he's frustrated, and he's like, Bond, was he a good lover? And she's like, and she said,
what do you think?
And she's like, what do you think? And then he just gets angry and punches this thing. I'm not even sure what it is. It's like a
wood box.
Like a wood box or something with glass in it for some reason. goes over to see if he's okay, and he pulls his hand out, and he's got a little glass of wood shards in his knuckles.
Oh, it
And
looks
she starts,
yeah.
yeah, and she starts pulling him out. Then she gets back into bed, and she gets this ice cube and starts, pulling along herself. Sir, that you could feel this and this, and trying to be as sensual as possible. And you could tell she's got him wrapped around her finger, and
Yeah.
there's no getting around that.
But the thing is that her henchman wants her, but can't have her. She knows that and uses him for the pleasure that she can take from him without him actually having any of the sensation of her taking the pleasure from him.
Yes. So now
it is quite evil.
So now the next day, Bond and Jones are with Zukovsky, and they're going into what he says is an old KGB intelligence office, and now it's just for the FSB, the Federal Security Bureau. The same people work here, the same stuff. And he says, have you found Nikolai yet? And they're scanning for him. He's like, no. And Bond's like, try the emergency frequency. And they're looking for him. They're trying to figure out what the plan is. And like, what would they do with all this plutonium in this submarine? And Bond's like, what class submarine is it? And he's like, oh, Valentine's like, it's a Vector 3. And
Nuclear.
Jones is like, that's it. It's like, that's it. Nuclear reactor. You put that weapons grade plutonium in the reactor, instant catastrophic meltdown. And he's like, and Valentine's like, but why? And Bond's like, here you go. It's like you blow up Istanbul. The explosion would destroy Istanbul, and the only way for the Russians to get the oil out, instead of shipping it by tanker across the sea, would be south through the King pipeline, as Jones points out. So she would be not only making a ton of money, but she would be in control of world politics a lot too, having control of all this oil. Even Zukovsky pointed out that over half the people in this casino would have loved it if the King pipeline could just disappear. So that's the evil plan of Elektra and Renard, that they're going to take control of the global oil market by killing 8 million people in Istanbul, and they're crazy enough to think it would be an accident. Because nuclear submarines just have plutonium lying around that you could shove in there all the time. Something that Bond will point out is an absurdity later as well. But then as they're talking...
I was kind of surprised that they didn't bring up the fact that it would also sway, because there's a lot of talk about oil, obviously. I thought that it would sway people against nuclear power if there was a nuclear accident that blew up a place, but they never really got that far. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, it's true. And that's when the guy that Bond told to sweep for emergency on the emergency frequency chimes in. He's like, yeah, we got something beeping, because M, now being the morning. Yeah, because in the morning, Elektra came to say goodbye to M. And she's like, oh, what's the time? And M gave her Elektra gave her the clock. And it's like, it's time for you to die. No sooner than Elektra left the room, M breaks open the back of the clock, uses the wires borrows the wires from it to hook up to the locator card, and uses the battery to charge it. And that allows the GPS signal to gear. And even though they have no confirmation that this particular locator card is the one with the bomb, because of movie, Bond just automatically decides that it must be the locator card. It must be M. And even though Maiden's Tower is actually located in Istanbul...
For the record there, wait. Sly Snide. 2 seconds.
God damn. What?
Bond gave M the tracking card.
Right, but it's just a tracker. There's nothing...
She attaches a battery to it, and it becomes an SOS for her.
Yeah, with the self-repeating signal, but it doesn't have... There's no reason for Bond to know this particular GPS that the guy's picking up on is M's.
So you've just given your boss a locator card, and she's recently been kidnapped. Then
no, because
suddenly,
if you're on an emergency, if you're on a frequency like that, you're going to pick up any GPS signal, not just the one. So that's something that's a little weird.
No, I believe it. I believe it 100%.
Okay, yeah, no. So anyway, they pick it up, and they falsely state that Maiden's Tower is in the North Black Sea, which it is not. It's south in the river, in Istanbul proper. So they said, oh, and Zukovsky's like, okay, we know where M is, but now we got to find Nikolai. And then Bond turns, and he sees Mr. Bullion ushering out of the room. He's like, what? And he sees that Bullion has left his gold briefcase there. He's like, bomb! And everybody runs and dives for cover, and big explosion, and Valentine appears to be dead. They all run outside. Bond and Jones pursue Bullion, and then they get cornered by all of Elektra's guards. And now Bullion flips the line back on him. He's like, after you, I insist. And they put him on a boat. Meanwhile, the nuclear submarine has arrived at wherever it is that it's docking at. And Renard asks, is this a skeleton crew? And the guy's like, yeah, we got your equipment on board. And Renard's like, great, here's some refreshments for your men. And of course, they all get fatally poisoned from it. And
Yeah. It's
Renard's
really,
like, okay, toss the bodies overboard. And they do.
and
And
they do.
And he greets Elektra and says goodbye to her. And you can tell she's so excited about what's about to happen. And yet he is so brokenhearted because he's not going to see her again. And she's just totally ignoring him on that front. And he's like, the future is yours. Have fun with it. And he walks away. It's just so like an upset puppy or something. And she's just totally giddy and just totally ignorant of the way he's feeling because she's, again, got him wrapped around her finger. And so,
well, and also he is going to die. Don't forget, he has the bullet in his head.
Yeah, something that they tease and doesn't really go anywhere. So he keeps saying the line that, oh, you forget I'm already dead, but you're not dead because you're living and breathing, mister. It's like, yeah. So back at Maiden's Tower, Bullion shows up with Bond, and Gabor show up with Bond and Jones, and they bring him into this room, and Elektra kind of looks somewhat judgmentally at Jones, and she's like, and it looks back at Bond, and it's kind of funny because when Jones and Bond climbed out of the pipe, Jones says, before we go any further, what's the story with you and Elektra? And I'm thinking, why does she care? It's like, if you've known this guy for like half a day, like, what do you give a shit? And the same thing happens again when she's like, when Elektra mentions that and Jones realizes that they've slept together. And she kind of gives Bond this little look. And I'm like, really? It's like, she gives a shit about that? And so Elektra's like, oh, take her to Renard. And so they take her away. And she's like, oh, we were sweeping the bottom of the bay and we found some neat treasures, including this. And she pulls out this like 17th century garrote, which looks totally awesome, by the way. But so they sit Bond on this thing.
This is great.
The medieval looking thing. And he's fighting as hard as he can not to get strapped in, but he is. And she sits on the thing and she says, 5 more screws, 5 more turns, and your neck will break. And the way this device works is you're locked in with your hands, legs, and neck. And she cranks this handle, which pushes this cylindrical solid metal bar through the vent into his neck. Right, like a post to potentially break his neck. And he's like, and Bond kind of insinuates that he was right about her having Stockholm syndrome. She's like, no. And then she sets him straight that once she found out that her father wasn't going to pay the ransom, she turned Renard, seduced him, convinced him that you're going to need to injure me in some way, so they think this kidnapping's you're for real. And he couldn't do it, so she reveals she did it herself, and she pulls off this earring she's been wearing for the whole movie, which covers up part of her lower ear. And you realize that the lower ear is gone. She had cut it away. And she smiles, and Bond's just like really kind of surprised because he didn't even think Elektra had gone that far. And now we realize that she didn't have Stockholm syndrome. She's just playing everybody like a fiddle. And so she keeps turning the screws.
This is the part in the movie where we find out that Elektra King is the villain of the entire movie. And we found out now. It's incredible. I think that this is the absolute success of what was talked about between M and Bond at the beginning of GoldenEye in their first interaction, where he was a relic of the Cold War. And eventually, even Alec Trevelyan in GoldenEye says, for every woman that blah, blah died, you couldn't protect or whatever. And we'll get into that in a second. But I think that this is an excellent sort of culmination of Pierce Brosnan's. It's amazing how that era was the one, really the only one, that gave us a lady Bond villain, like full-on Bond villain.
Yeah. And it's funny because as she's turning all the screws in this thing, she insinuates, oh, you loved me, you're going to miss me. And he's like, you meant nothing to me. And right when she gets down to the last one, he's like, you were just one last screw,
which is the one that's going to kill him. It's such a good line.
It's the double entendre. It's like, okay. And then right as she's about to kill him, the bullets start flying and she looks and Valentine has showed up with his Vought and is shooting everybody up. And Valentine storms right into the door and he sees Bullion. And Bullion's like, oh, boss, I'm so pleased you're alive. And he's like, me too.
Me too.
And he shoots him to death.
Oh,
and the next scene is questionable.
Yes.
On the one hand, it's really cool that he walks in and he has this expression like, Bond and Elektra are playing some kinky sex game, but I'm not interested. I'm looking for the driver of the submarine. It's big and black, and the driver is a very good friend of mine. But on the other hand,
oh my God, Robbie
Yeah.
Coltrane.
but on the other hand, Zukovsky already knows that Elektra is the villain, so he should have just, when he walked in there, just shot her immediately. Instead, he entertains this thought, which is admittedly very funny. He's like, I'm looking for a submarine. It's big and black, and the driver is a very good friend of mine. And then she picks up Nikolai's hat, his captain's hat with her pistol hiding behind it. And Zukovsky recognizes it immediately, and he gets angry. He's like, bring it to me. And she's like, oh, what a shame. He's just gone. And she shoots him twice through the hat. And he gets hit in the chest. He collapses on the ground. And Bond looks really despondent at this point. And before Elektra can really pay attention to what's going on, Zukovsky picks up his cane, which is revealed to be a cane gun, and he's alive. And Elektra had the gun pointing up, and she's kind of looking at him and waiting to see what he's going to do. But then he takes aim and he turns towards Bond, and she's like, huh? And she's like, oh, let's see where this goes. And he's about to shoot, and then he readjusts his aim and shoots the right arm restraint, breaking it.
Yeah, one of the cuffs.
Yeah, one of the cuffs. And then he kind of smiles to Bond, and Bond smiles back, and now Zukovsky is dead for sure this time, unfortunately. Yeah, and Elektra's like, man, Zukovsky really hated you. And then she comes over there to finish him off, and Bond breaks through from the cuff to grab her gun out of her hand. She starts running. Gabor comes in, distracting Bond. Bond shoots him dead. And then he starts chasing Elektra, and she's zipping up the stairs. And she's like, oh, James, you can't kill me, not in cold blood. And then he keeps running up the stairs after her. She's like, oh, you can't kill me, not someone you've loved. And they keep going. And all of a sudden, you hear M scream, Bond! And Bond stops, and he doubles back, and he sees M in there, and he just shoots the lock on the door. And
Perfect.
Or on the gate. And yes, and he starts zooming up the stairs, and he finally finds Elektra standing by the bed. And he's like, that's it. It's over, Elektra. You're going to call him off. Get on your radio and call him off.
Kat, do you mind if I smoke?
No. And she's like, call him off. And he's like, she's like, no. And she gets on the radio. She's like, call him off. And she's like really startled when he raises her voice, his voice
I
that
was
much.
startled. I jumped.
Yeah, it's really great. And she picks up the walkie, and she's like, Renaud? And she's like, you wouldn't kill me, not someone you've loved. You miss me. And then Renard chimes in. He's like, yes. And she's like, dive, Bond. And then he just shoots her right in the chest. Granted, that would not have been that would not have been a lights out death right there, but he shoots her once. He probably should have shot her more because she deserved it. And she's lying on the bed.
I think that would have been excessive for the audience, but I appreciate where you're coming from.
Yes, and so Bond kind of kisses her on the forehead. And
wait. She says, you wouldn't kill me.
That's what I said. I already said that.
You missed me. Okay.
Yeah, I already covered that. Yeah, and he shoots her.
And
then
he
walks over the bed, and he's like,
I never miss.
I never miss.
I never miss.
I haven't gotten this. You interrupted me. So he walks over to the bed to kiss her, and he does. And Em is at the top of the stairs seeing this, and she's kind of distraught and embarrassed and kind of humiliated and all this. And Bond doesn't even turn to M to say anything. He's just like, okay. So he just goes out the window, puts his pistol in his at his belt, and then he takes off his coat, dives into the submarine pen, and just happens to be lucky enough to get onto the submarine deck right as the door was closing. Knocks the first guy unconscious, takes another guy at gunpoint, and he's like, where is she? And then Renard and his guys are like, they're setting up to make this nuclear rod, however it is they're doing it. And the guy's like, it's going to take me half an hour.
It doesn't.
Yeah, and he's like, not at all. And he's like, it's going to take half an hour. It's like, okay. So they go to work. And then we cut to Bond using this bald guy as like a battering ram he's just smashing his head against the glass. It's not going to do any good to break open the door. But then, yeah. So he opens the door, and then she's in there, and she's like, James. He's like, what? Thought I forgot you, eh? So then they have to move through the submarine, including him having to go outside the submarine, swim along the outside, and get let back in. And this is really good suspense, and it's like you practice seeing if you can hold your breath the whole time. As the submarine is, yes,
you
Bond,
do that too?
Yes, because Bond.
Guys! I have to interrupt this show. I have to interrupt this James Bond recap with just one thing. Kat, please feel free to mute your microphone. But okay, so whenever you get to a point where you can be like watch a movie and then you hold your breath for as long as the main character, it's the best time ever. You should try it. I don't do it often because I'm a smoker. Anyway. I interrupted the show, and I'm sure that I soured Cat on the entire experience. Cat, I'm
So
done.
he's going into the control room and he kills everybody in there at the expense of destroying the controls. This causes the submarine to become vertical and just embed into the ground. And so Renard has to like climb back up through the submarine to get there, while Bond and Christmas have to climb around to get inside as well.
Oh, and it's
they
cool.
brace themselves. I never said it wasn't.
Okay.
And so they're moving through there, and they eventually get to the chamber they're looking for, where Renard, and this is great suspense throughout the whole submarine climax. Well, and Renard is at the main reactor, which, with the submarine vertical, it's now actually horizontal to him. Normally it would be coming out of the floor. And so he's pushing this rod in there, trying to get it, and it's starting to overload the reactor, and Bond kicks him out of the way. And a few times he has to keep trying to put this thing in there as they keep fighting each other. But at no point during this fight does Renard seem to be the guy who's impervious to pain, who's going to become stronger and harder than any normal man. I mean, Stamper was stronger in his final fight than Renard is here.
But I
mean, Bond even literally kicks him at one point, knocks him down, and he recoils if he's in pain. It's like, wait a minute. They said this guy's supposed to be like immortal to that, but I guess they forgot. At one point, finally,
okay.
Yeah, at one point he finally gets Bond in a choke. They get each other in a chokehold, and he's like, "You forget, I'm already dead." And he's like, "Haven't you heard? So is she." And he's like, "You're lying." And Bond's like, "Yeah, no." And then he just starts screaming at him, "No, liar!" And he kicks him really hard and locks him in this little side cage.
He kicks him really hard. Yes,
he does. And then Christmas Jones tries to stop him, and he elbows her pretty hard. And he starts putting the rod back in there, and he looks to her, and he's like, "Welcome to my nuclear family." And he succeeds in getting it all the way in this time. It's getting overloaded. And then Bond grabs this hose and uses it to cover.
Well, it's a hydraulic hose that was thrown out while Renard was pushing the plutonium rod into the reactor, which, by the way, should be in the ground.
Well, it's because the submarine's inverted.
No, I know, but it's just a weird thing that you would like push, know. Anyway.
And so Renard, he's like, "Welcome to my nuclear family." And he slides it in there. The explosion's about to go off. And Bond reattaches that hydraulic hose. Mm-hmm. And then Renard hears the noise. He's like, "What's this?" And he looks up at Bond. And Bond's like, "She's waiting for you." And then he pulls the switch, disengaging ejecting the plutonium rod into Renard, and he even winces in pain and even grunts at this. And then he looks back up at Bond, and he just falls over dead.
Okay, but this is something that we have to talk about. If you are winded, whether or not you feel pain, no, Cat, come on. I don't want to see the arms.
I was yawning, so just keep going.
Okay, so, but I'm just saying, like, you are going to be out of breath whether or not you feel it. Like, it's not a painful experience. You're just, the wind is knocked out of you. As a human, you need to breathe whether or not you feel pain, right? And I've lost her. So anyway, Renard is winded, and so he can't breathe, and thusly he dies. Luckily, there is an escape hatch in this submarine, and Bond and Dr. Jones escape through that hatch, and they go to the surface. The submarine inexcusably it explodes with no repercussions on the surface, no explosions, nothing happens. But Bond and Christmas, they surface and they wave to a nearby pleasure cruise with a bunch of tourists who were in Turkey at the time, Istanbul, not Constantinople. Welcome back, Cat. So Christmas Jones and James Bond have just surfaced, and they've waved to a pleasure cruise. At this point,
all right. So M goes back to Scotland. Tanner doesn't rub it in her face that he was right, even though he should have. It would have been great. And Q, and R pulls up this infrared scanner and they find the car because the engine is still warm. And they're scanning for him, and there's no way for them to know that the people they find on the infrared are actually Bond,
No.
but they assume that it is.
Yeah.
And they see him lying in bed, and M's like, I thought you said he was with Dr. Jones. And then it starts getting red, and she's like, it's getting redder. And R and Tanner look at each other because they know what it means. And then we see that it's actually them having sex, and M's like, 007, totally shocked, like, whatever. And R closes the laptop. He's like, oh, it must be a premature form of the new Millennium Bug. And he walks out of the room, and oh, that's right. We did have a moment on a really blatantly bad green screen with Bond and Dr. Jones having a glass of champagne with the fireworks shooting in the background. He's like, I've always wanted to have Christmas in Turkey. She's like, is that a Christmas joke? And he's like, no. And so once we see them making out in bed, he finally says his other real Christmas joke. I thought Christmas only comes once a year. The end. Now, I really like Sophie Marceau in the role as the lead villain. I thought she was really good. Totally out.
Wait, before we get there, I apologize for yelling. First things first, this is flat out the only James Bond movie that I've ever seen where right after the fade to black, it says James Bond will return. There is no wait for credits. There is nothing. It is just fade to black, James Bond will return. And it's like, wow. Okay. I think I'm supposed to think that was impressive, or you guys are going into production very quickly. So anyway, you were saying.
Yeah, so like I was saying, Sophie Marceau was really great in this movie as the lead villain. The plot background is a little weird. I like that there's more of an emphasis on character in this film than in some of the other ones he did. I think it's Brosnan's best performance. I do think they should have pushed the whole story point of M basically using Bond as an abuse of power to help out her friend to get back his money, which is totally not an MI6 concern. I thought that could have gone places, and that would be something that if it was in the same continuity, Bond or Silva could have brought up in Skyfall. It's like, oh yeah, this lady who sends you out to die and sends you on missions which aren't even pertinent to Queen and Country, just for her own, her own pleasure and benefit. Something that Silva could have used against her in his campaign to smear her is that, oh yeah, you're the one who sends people off on missions just for your own personal benefit, kind of a thing. Because it was a neat idea. We've never really seen M ask Bond to do that before. If anything, it's been the exact opposite, where M is always strict and not wanting Bond to do anything personal. And that's what he's doing in the beginning of the movie. He's doing a personal favor for M.
You know what would have been a nice touch, and I'm sorry to, but I did bring up, Electra King is the first Silva.
Sort of.
Really. Well, but the thing is, and I'm a big fan of peppering in. I find the entire Bond franchise to be something that I can shuffle with and put in where I like. And in terms of things that I would enjoy, I think if Silva had said, "Don't you remember Electra King?" Just that little thing, just that little crouton would have made me a bit happy.
Yeah.
More happy than bringing back Blofeld.
Yeah.
Anyway, just a thought. I'm such a big fan.
Yeah, so they should have pushed that. I thought that would have been cool. The action's good, even though some of the Parahawk scene is a little weird, and again the whole scene of the caviar factory. What's also really ridiculous about that is the fact that Bullion is already Electra's inside man. He was there at the start of this. He was in his car, and he's the one who reported that, hey, Bond's here, which is why they sent the helicopters as well. So I'm thinking, you could have just gone in and killed Valentina. It's like, I get it. They want to have cool action scenes, and actually that specific action scene was written for GoldenEye as well. That's where they were going to use the helicopters. I can't remember at which point exactly that action scene would have happened, but they scrapped it because it was just, the budget was getting too high and the movie would have been getting too long and just one too many action scenes. But I think overall this is a really enjoyable movie. And not as ridiculous. All the Bond plots are ridiculous, but it seems people complain about it more often in the Brosnan era than in others. It's like, yeah, I grant them Die Another Day, but I mean, really, are the plots of Tomorrow Never Dies and The World Is Not Enough any more ridiculous than the plot of GoldenEye or The Spy Who Loved Me or Moonraker or, those movies? I don't think so. So I think it is like a really good movie, and I think maybe they should return to trying a female main villain again at some point in the franchise's future.
Well, I think it's only logical. People want all the different James Bonds, and I think why not try more different James Bond villains? Like I think lady villains are hot. So and it's a James Bond movie, so I usually go to James Bond movie for attractive people. How many martinis, lady?
You know, this one I thoroughly enjoy it. I have high replay value. I give it an 8. 8 martinis.
I am also an 8. That's boring.
Yeah, well, not really. I mean, I can't really think of anything else to have talk about for this movie to have like a big conversation. I mean, Robert Carlyle, I guess, is totally a bit overshadowed by Sophie Marceau, though in a way he should be because she's the lead villain. Even though it is interesting that she's the main villain, but Renard is the one who gets the bulk of the climax. And the climax is largely action packed, but the one I was more driven towards is Bond versus Elektra when he's chasing her up those stairs. That's like, how's this going to end? Because she seemed genuinely delusional in that she thinks that Bond will not kill her because they've made love, and you could tell she's totally had the spoiled rich kid mentality, and that's why she engineered this whole plot against her father. I doubt she even cares about, like, when she says, "Oh, he stole the land from my mother, and that's why he married into our family for his pipe." It's like, lady, do you really give a shit about that, or are you just pissed that he didn't pay the ransom, and you're just like they said, like the tabloid said, "Oh, Elektra, the wild child," and she's just like, like the Penguin says in Batman Returns, are you just the girl that didn't get the present she wanted for her sweet 16 birthday party type thing? Because that's the personality she seems to convey to me in the movie.
But that's not a personality that she conveys to me, and I don't know what that is. I don't know what the difference is. But when Elektra King seems like, if you want to start off with like a naive, spoiled little rich girl who was kidnapped by someone who just wanted the money. And then she found out that her father, who had the money, wasn't going
and then some.
And he wasn't going to pay it. And so then you're like, what? You have all of this and you will not sacrifice for me. I think that was a breaking point for Elektra King. And I think that was the moment where she started reassessing everything. Well, she cut off her own ear. So did Van Gogh.
Well, she's a bit crazier because, like I said, the way she's behaving when Renard says goodbye to her, when like she's totally giddy as a schoolgirl and he's just totally heartbroken because he's leaving her. Or when she sees Renard show up at Maiden's Tower and she's already in her pajamas and she's skirting towards the door, and it's like she's so into this. And like Bond says, you can't seriously be crazy enough to think that anybody is going to believe that it's just an accident, that the day after this terrorist stole this weapons-grade plutonium, that it just happens to find its way into a submarine and blow up Istanbul, which just happens to benefit you. And oh, what do you know? The guy who did this happens to be the terrorist who kidnapped you, and there's questions of stuff. It's like he's smart enough to see that there's no way, like Elektra didn't really think this through. And to me, that reflects almost a juvenile type attitude on her part.
I think it's hubris. I think it is absolute manipulative hubris. And that's what is her, like,
manipulation implies that it's thinking a few steps ahead. She didn't seem to be thinking ahead with getting away with this scheme.
As far as she thought, if she destroyed Istanbul, then that would completely and totally reroute all pipelines in.
Or it would do that, but she would get taken down with it. Like people would figure it out pretty quickly, like Bond says. And the fact that she goes from wanting revenge on her father to being full-blown psychopath who's going to massacre 8 million people, that again reads to me almost like cognitive dissonance, or like she's a juvenile type personality, not really thinking or processing the consequences of her actions. Because it's like, okay, I could totally buy why she's upset with her father for not paying the ransom. Anyone would be at that point, especially given how insanely rich he is. But for that to suddenly translate to want to massacre 8 million people, like, to me, that just sounds like she's very, again, like she's juvenile and she's like spoiled kid, didn't get her way, whine, and just going to do what she wants, even though she still has a bit of cunning.
But also, don't forget that the beginning conflict where Elektra shows up is in the village where they're trying to
save the
stop
holy site
from the holy site because she values her mother's heritage more than she does her father's. And so it's
right.
And so I do, and she does say at least twice. She says, it's my mother's legacy. This is my mother found this oil. She is all about that. And she definitely, no matter what happened during her captivity, I think that she twisted that against the person who would not rescue her. And that was part of her, like, it's a very, I don't know. It's hard to have a lady Bond villain because as a gentleman, I must not disgrace her. She's cunning. She's using her value. And if you find her to be childish, then I guess, I don't know.
Okay, so she does value her mother's heritage, but that still doesn't, I don't see how her wanting revenge against her father and valuing her heritage translates to being out of the blue, okay, now I'm going to kill 8 million people, because it didn't seem like she was that way the year before. So I just figured that there's something else going on here. Like, usually with a Bond villain, yeah, they're psychopaths from the beginning, but given that they very much made the case that with Elektra, there was a very specific motive. There was an inciting event where it's like, oh, this is the last straw with her father. It's like, you've taken my mom's land, you've done all this, but now you're not going to pay the ransom. I'm done with you. And that seemed to have set something off for her to decide to snowball this event where you're suddenly going to go from simply building your pipeline and competing fairly with them, decide that, okay, I'm going to kill all these people just so I could be at the top of the mountain now.
Well, I think that you hit the nail on the head when you were talking about the Penguin referring to Michelle Pfeiffer in Batman Returns.
Yeah. But yeah, I like it, and I admit I wanted more out of the final fight between Bond and Renard for the guy who gets stronger and stronger every day till the day he dies. But then again, that set was very constrictive because of the way, with the submarine being tilted, that they couldn't really have a big fight. But it was cool. I still like it. So yeah, 8 martinis.
Yeah, I'm surprised that I like it better than Tomorrow Never Dies. I thought I was going to like Tomorrow Never Dies better, but there was just too much sugar in Tomorrow Never Dies. I like this version of Bond. It's a little bit drier. It's a dry.
Yeah, now that you mention that, I'm thinking about knocking down Tomorrow Never Dies to a 7.5.
Don't worry, we have to take care of that at the end of the run. We can't do this now.
That's right.
It'll take a whole thing. Don't worry. Tune in, agents. We're going to do a whole rundown at the end of these, and don't think that we're done next week.
Oh, and last thing I want to talk about, Zukovsky. I love Zukovsky. I wish that he had lived, though he probably wouldn't have appeared in the next one anyway. He and Jack Wade alike, I think, are my two favorite contributions in a way to the Brosnan era. Like, those are characters that I would want to see again or repeated in some way. Like, you always have different Felixes, but they all seem to fall into a similar personality. Like, you would, like we talked about last week, or that, you couldn't have Jack Wade be Felix Leiter because the personality and everything is so different about him. Likewise, Zukovsky can't just be the average person he meets. He was like a very specific character. So I really like that, and I think that's something that we didn't really get in the Craig era. Really, I mean, yeah, they did give us Mathis, but they kind of, to me, when we did our Quantum review, they kind of botched that a little bit in that movie. So I find Zukovsky and Jack Wade to both be really memorable, and that's something, particularly with Zukovsky, that I find very iconic that I'll miss from other performances.
Well, it's an interesting point, just because don't forget it was a reintroduction of Q, Moneypenny. Like, there were when they introduced your Zukovsky or Jack Wade or your Felix Leiter, it was all new incorporation because of the reboot sitch. Like, They didn't have space to, and Mathis was a pleasant surprise. And I don't think, heavens. Well, no, you still get Tanner, like Tanner throughout the Craig era. Anyway, we'll go through
yeah.
all of.
But I mean, memorable, like really memorable, like Zukovsky and Wade were amazing. So I miss Zukovsky. I like him a lot.
Yeah.
What was the last thing I was going to say?
I don't know.
Well, we do have the chat as well that we need to get to.
I know. I was thinking about that myself.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to thank LDG of Geeks and Joy. Thank you so much. Thank you, Russian Bot.
Oh, that's right. I was going to say, hats off to Desmond Llewellyn. His final performance is Q.
Yes, absolutely. What's your favorite Q performance?
That's a hard one. There's so many of them that are really good. I do admit that little heartfelt bit at the end here where he says, the 2 rules. I really liked that a lot. But also in Goldfinger where he's just giving him shit or all. It's funny because he's kind of like this comforting presence in each of the films that it's kind of hard to rank them. But I like that they didn't just outright try and repeat Q. It's like, no, we're going to do something substantially different, which is kind of nice.
Well, and that is like, no matter how you feel about John Cleese's Quartermaster, I do like that he was a successor as opposed to a recasting.
Yeah.
But 2 movies, whatever.
Yeah.
Cam is here.
Oh, hey, Cam.
And I think this is what he's trying to say. Ba-da.
Yep.
Okay. Captain Marty Spock, ahoy, sir. The absence of a slide whistle sound effect was definitely appreciated. I don't know when. Actually, you know what? I was thinking about there is a point with the fishing boat.
Right.
At the beginning, and there is a corkscrew, and I was like, I am so happy there is no slide.
That was another really funny Q line I like that I didn't mention when Bond's like, oh, Q, talking about retirement. He's like, no, something you destroyed, my fishing boat. And you see it's all ripped to shreds and they're putting it back together. Yeah.
Oh. Hang on a second. Well, and I do think this. I know that I popped this up during your description, but I never meant it. I thought it was really cold-blooded. And also, after he kills her, he goes over to mourn her. And I found that disturbing and yet insightful towards the character.
It is questionable why he does that, because it's like he's fed up with her at this point. He figured it out a little while ago, like a few days earlier. And why does he do that? I mean, it's just kind of odd. He's giving her the same treatment they gave to Paris Carver in a way. But Paris wasn't a supervillain.
Yeah. I don't know. Again, I feel like it flashes back to what Alex said in GoldenEye. It's like, is it giving comfort to all those women that you couldn't save? And so it's like, it harkens back to that in being like, James Bond showed up and could have turned her good, but didn't. It's almost like a trope that, what did you think was going to happen?
Right.
Like it goes back, it kind of covers a bunch of tropes and it flips them a bit. And so I do appreciate the weirdness of that scene based on what I think Brosnan, again, was trying to bring to the character.
Yeah.
Anyway, Cat needs coffee.
Yeah, I do. I don't know why.
Tiki Fire. It's always good to see you, Tiki Fire. Thank you so much. Tiki Fire. How many martinis? 8. So he's on par. Cam. 7 martinis.
It is a lot of fun.
It is upper. It's good. And also, I forgot to mention Pierce Brosnan's hair. He is cutting a figure and a suit. He's not as skinny as Goldeneye. Like, I think he's, I think he's dad bod fit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, Tiki Fire, he perfectly mixes Connery and Moore in this, and I assume that means, well, yeah, I suppose. Cam says hubris is a good descriptor for Elektra's personality. She is rather juvenile and hasn't thought things out to their logical conclusions. He does correct his spelling, and Tiki Fire continues to say she's a stone cold killer. And then Cam plays us out. Kat, you want to read this one? Or can you?
Yes, Kat and Scotty, great reviews. Always enjoy your takes on these great films, great fun movies. I love Bond. I just got a huge Playmobil DB5. I'm very excited. Wow, that is very awesome. Yes, I've seen pictures of the Lego DB5. It looks pretty cool. I just put together a Lego tumbler, in fact. Yes.
How big is it?
Let's see if it's
No. We'll do it. We'll wait for our Batman reviews. We'll show it on the Batman review. It's big.
Yeah.
It's like this.
It's big. I can't do it because the screen's kind of because I'm on my phone.
It's
big.
No, but don't give that away for free now. We'll talk about Batman and show it. All right.
Provided I can fix the StreamYards.
Well, so thanks everybody for hanging out. We appreciate everyone who's here. Don't forget to like and subscribe, write comments, all things.
Yes, we will be.
Please.
Yes, we'll have the last of the Eon films of ours to review next week. Not chronologically the last, but the last one for us.
Yes.
Die Another Day.
Oh my stars. Yeah. Is it gonna be a big finale, or is it just gonna be a regular show?
Well, I mean, we're gonna continue the show afterwards with the other unofficial films. So
no, I know, but Eon deserves a little bit of a. Should I wear a tie?
Yeah, we'll do a finale. Yeah, we will. We could do something.
All right. Cool. So next week, and the thing is that I think we should celebrate what I consider to be one of the worst James Bond movies ever.
For sure.
So
I forgot one last thing to mention.
Yes.
The title of the film comes from Bond's family motto on his family crest in Our Majesty's Secret Service.
The world is not enough.
Not enough. And he works that line into the movie even.
Foolish sentiment.
Family motto.
Booyah.
One I could definitely co-sign.
Well, on that note, Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns will return. And of course, James Bond will return. We'll see you guys later.